intellectuals within their membership. It shouldn't be a question of asking academics to come and talk to you. You should cultivate your own intellectuals and theorists to do the work for you, and in a sense, in direct connection with the membership. Being a union member and being an intellectual should not be separate worlds. And this goes to the question of learning. Revitalisation is a learning process. And unions have to become learning organisations. And what do I mean with this? Learning is not simply a question of getting new ideas, acquiring new information. It's also a question of getting rid of some of the old maxims, some of the old beliefs which are no longer appropriate. In computer speak, you have to defragment the registry from time to time. You have to clear away the clutter. And most unions have a lot of outdated routines and recipes and traditions which are no longer appropriate. And getting rid of these, defragmenting the stock of union behaviour, can be very painful. Learning isn't something that occurs automatically, because, of course, organisations as such don't learn. People within organisations learn. And this means learning how to learn has to be part of the process. Unions have to develop the capacity for intelligence within their own ranks, and this goes back to the theme of organic intellectuals. And becoming a learning organisation requires difficult structural changes. Chairman Mao talked about the long march through the institutions. In a sense, transforming a trade union involves a long march through the institutions as well. We need new concepts of solidarity, and I'm now coming towards my close because I don't have much time left. Once it was possible to talk about the average union member. Usually it was a middle-aged man working in industry. That was never really an adequate picture, and it's certainly not the case anymore. And if we look at the composition of the workforce, women as well as men, migrants as well as native workers, precarious workers as well as those in relatively secure status, their interests are different from the interests of the traditional core constituencies. And the old agenda in many trade unions is not appropriate for their interests. And the question is, how can we recognise these differences of interest without treating them as opposed, irreconcilable interests? And this means creating a collective identity out of difference. One doesn't think of oneself as part of a collective spontaneously anymore, if one ever did. Creating a collective identity, a sense of us, of being in this together, is a process which involves very serious work by unions. I often use the phrase, unions in the past have relied very commonly on mechanical solidarity, something imposed on workers from above. What is needed is a bottom-up organic solidarity in which we actually construct a sense of common fate, common responsibility for each other among different constituencies. And this means creating a sense of unity, even though there certainly doesn't exist uniformity. Trade unions have to integrate diversity. And what this means is a sense of reciprocity, even though it's accepted that identities and interests among those we represent as trade unions are very different. Solidarity in one country is not enough, and I make these points very briefly, because I think they're fairly clear. We know that globalisation has been accelerating in the last couple of decades, often imposed as part of a deliberate political strategy. And therefore, solidarity has to be international. Or maybe we should say solidarities in the plural, because, again, one reflection of diversity, including international diversity, is that there is not simply one form of solidarity anymore. But internationalism, as trade unions have understood it, has often been a very bureaucratic, top-down process. I was in Athens for the European Trade Union Confederation Congress a couple of weeks ago, and there you saw international bureaucracy in action, and it was not terribly effective, I think. There can't simply be international experts within trade unions who take care of the international issues and everyone else can ignore them. We have to make internationalism part of the mainstream understanding and activity, in particular in trade union education, I would say, since I'm talking to a large degree to educationalists. And this involves questions of how we link the local, the national and the international levels together so that people at each level know what is being done at other levels and understand the reasons and how they can be complementary rather than segregated. And this leads to my final point. Strategic innovation requires an ideological struggle, because union weakness has ideological roots as well as material ones. In most countries, most trade unions have lost the belief that they once had, that they're capable of achieving a better economy and a better society. In the main, the best that they can hope for is some kind of damage limitation. Because the ideas of individual responsibility, individual interests, and the whole way of thinking that the market is everything, this has become part of the common sense of everyday talk and everyday thought. And so if unions are to revitalise, they have to challenge this mindset, this common sense. They need a battle of ideas, a new imaginative idea of what unions are for and what they can achieve. And I often say a new utopia, because utopia is a word which is often used as a term of abuse, but it seems to me if one doesn't have some sort of space for a utopia in one's mind, one is never going to achieve anything. A new vocabulary, because some of the old slogans that one still sees on union banners may appeal to those of us who've been locked in the trade union movement for 30 years, but the Facebook and Twitter generation doesn't understand them, and we have to be able to speak to them. Because unions in most countries have been shrinking in their membership, in their constituency, unions have to ally with other progressive movements. And an essential point, I think, some people say unions are too involved in politics and that they should get back to the functions of representing workers in the workplace. It seems to me this is quite wrong. Unions are essentially political organisations, but I think for too long they've been locked into the wrong kind of politics. And they have to rethink what sort of politics they are engaged in. And all these are themes which I'm sure will be discussed much more and more eloquently later in the day. But they all lead to the final question. Do trade unions dare to create new strategies and arguments, or are they essentially happy to stick with the old routines and manage their own decline? And if so, the future may not look very happy. Thank you very much.